Thank you for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course,
it's nice
man.
to meet you guys.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, man. You mind just introducing yourself? Tell me who you are, what you do.
Not at all. So, where to start? So, my name is Zach Iscol.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a husband and a father. I've got 4 kids: 15-year-old
Awesome.
stepdaughter, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
Oh.
2-year-old right now is somewhere in this park.
Really?
Yeah, he's here with his babysitter for like an hour.
Oh, that's
he might
awesome.
even be in like that gaggle of kids over there.
That's awesome.
I've been a public servant for 2 decades.
Okay.
My public service started in the Marine Corps. I was in the infantry and special operations, led troops through some of the heaviest combat of the Iraq War. Spent the last 10 years building a number of businesses and building a nonprofit called the Headstrong Project that's one of the leading providers of mental health in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
So I was in one of the heaviest hit battalions of the Iraq War, came home, began to lose more of my Marines to suicide than I did in combat.
Oh, my God.
And started this organization in 2011 to provide world-class, cost-free, bureaucracy-free mental health care treatment to vets. And have been doing that now for 8-9 years. Also worked at Javits Medical Center. I was the deputy director there at the height of COVID a year ago. I led the turnaround of Javits. And am now running for comptroller in New York City.
Wow. That's quite the resume.
Yeah. Well, when you're old, you got a lot of years, you got stuff, you can build your resume. You guys are young.
Yeah.
Give yourselves another 20 years.
Of course. Yeah. That's so interesting, man. So you said that you do mental health, but that's the area that you've gone to really focus on. Is there like a specific reason?
Yeah, I mean, primarily because of the need within the veterans community.
Gotcha.
You know, so I come from like literally a lineage of officers in the Marine Corps that believe your number one job is to take care of your guys, take care of your Marines, and that responsibility doesn't end just because you take off the uniform or you relinquish command. So when we began to lose more Marines to suicide than we did in combat, you've got a responsibility to do something about that, and that led to me being in mental health. But I didn't, like, if you had asked me in 2010 or 2009 or 2005 if I would spend, time working in a mental health care nonprofit or building a I would never have thought that was the case.
Interesting.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting now is running for office in New York City is you learn very quickly that mental health is one of the biggest issues facing the city.
Of course.
It touches everybody.
Interesting.
And I hear from people all over the city that they can't sleep at night. I remember when I came home from Iraq and I couldn't sleep at night. And this city's been through a profound trauma in the last year.
Of course.
But these mental health issues have existed before COVID, and they're going to last long after COVID if we don't start doing things to address them here in New York.
That's amazing. Yeah. Kind of want to go back a little bit if you don't mind.
Yeah, not at all.
What was your mindset like going into the Marines and like actually being a young man and like being exposed to that kind of world?
Yeah, so I come from a family that most of my family has served. My grandfather worked for the Department of Sanitation, volunteered to go off to World War II at the age of 41.
Interesting.
My dad was in the Air Force. My mom taught public school. Service has always been a big part of my family story. A lot of my family members served in World War II. And I just grew up with those stories.
Interesting.
And so from a young age, I knew that I was going to serve in some capacity.
Gotcha.
And I played lightweight football in college. My lightweight football coach was a Marine officer in Vietnam. And so he encouraged me to join the Marines, and that's what led me down that path.
Interesting. So Jamar told us about your film. Your documentary, which kind of encapsulates your whole journey. Jerron had a couple questions related to the film that he wants to ask you.
Absolutely.
So I'll just let him do that.
Breaking out the notes.
He has some real extensive notes.
So I don't know what Jamar told you, but we're also working on a film.
You told me a little bit about it.
Yeah, so that's part of the reason. Like, we really liked what you were saying about also just being in the post-COVID era. And just people needing mental health. They're needing that attention with what's going on, and that's what we're trying to do with filmmaking. So we're trying to host a film festival with everyone who's been able to create through this time of uncertainty. Cool. So one of the questions I want to ask you based on your film was how did you initially connect through language barriers and cultural differences with the Iraqis when you first arrived?
That's a pretty easy answer. I had a great translator.
Gotcha.
Right? I met a guy named Abud Al-Kafaji, who's like a second father to me.
Interesting.
Who really helped me navigate those complexities.
Gotcha.
And so that's how.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
What was your relationship with that man?
He was like a second father to me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we were very, very close. His family is still my family. We lost him to cancer in 2011.
Oh my God, I'm
but,
so sorry to hear that.
He passed away here in New York, so I was able to be by his side. And his daughters are like sisters to me. They're still here in the city. 2 of them are in the NYPD. One lives in Poland. The other one is here. That she's thinking about moving back to Iraq. And then his wife is still here as well.
Gotcha.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You talk about the mindset you had when you first went in as a young man, and then when you came out, you saw the impact that it had on everybody, the Iraqis included, the ones that you interviewed.
Yeah.
Can you explain just the growth or like the mindset or how you see it now?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. One is, we went off to Iraq. We left as very sort of a conventional military force, right? And we didn't have the tactics, we didn't have the knowledge to operate in a very, very complicated counterinsurgency environment. The thing about counterinsurgency is it's much more about diplomacy than it is about fighting, right? It's more about like how many alliances can you build, about, and initially when we went in, we were creating a lot of enemies, right? Through our tactics, through the use of force. We didn't know who we could trust, who we couldn't trust. And that led to us creating a lot more enemies than we needed to, and than we should have. And what we learned over time is that there are certain groups that have very legitimate grievances that were fighting us for sometimes the right reasons, right? We invaded their country, maybe we killed a family member, a whole host of different issues. There are others that are not reconcilable, those that you can't build alliances for. And I think one of the things that the military learned over time was how to disaggregate those two, how to separate those different groups,
of course,
and form alliances to reduce the number of people that you need to fight. And also I think there's a piece of it that you learn that everybody sort of has a vested interest or a shared interest in success, which is peace, right? Nobody's winning when everybody's fighting.
Of course.
And that lesson in particular, I think, was pretty profound for a lot of folks that were operating in those places at that time.
And do you believe that that kind of communication could be applied to now in our own society as well, with everything?
Yeah, it's crazy how, you go all over New York City, everybody agrees on the fundamental issues. Nobody agrees on anything in New York, but everybody agrees on the fundamentals, right? Nobody is out there in New York saying, like, we need more homeless, we need fewer jobs, we need, a greater education gap in our schools. Like, we need more, we need less affordable housing, right? Like, nobody is saying, everybody agrees on what the problems are that need to be solved.
Of course.
And I think one of the interesting things is nobody's talking to each other about really how to solve them. They're blaming each other, they're talking past each other. But if people sat down and made a good faith effort to try and align around specific outcomes, there's no reason that in a place like New York City we shouldn't be able to solve some of these problems.
Of course. Awesome. Going back to you being in Iraq, did you interact with some of the civilians and like?
A lot. Look, at my second deployment, I was in charge of 350, 400 Iraqi soldiers. I spent a lot of time with their tribal leaders, with their family members. I spent a good amount of time.
What did you learn from them, if you don't mind me asking? Like, just being around them,
I learned a lot about their culture, about their history, about their families. Learned a lot about their traditions and their culture. Learned a lot about democracy in interesting ways. Like, we think about like tribal cultures as being antithetical to democracy, and it's not that way at all. In fact, tribal cultures tend to be actually pretty democratic in their processes, in the way they build consensus, in the way that they come to shared upon agreements and outcomes. So it took quite a bit away from those relationships.
Did any part of you, like being like a Marine, like, did your perspective on like fighting this war change and like just like being around them, or?
Did my perspective on fighting that war change? Can you be more specific?
More so going into it, like I know you said that you came from a lineage of Marines, and not really being exposed to that war, at least personally. But once getting into it and meeting these people, did your perspective
look, by the time that I was there, things had gone pretty far south pretty quickly in Iraq, right? Like Al-Qaeda was in charge of Fallujah. Like it was like, there was a ton of sectarian violence, terrorist attacks, kidnappings. I mean, it was really bad at that time. I think that, when you're a young person going off to war, like, your perspective definitely changes over time.
Of course.
About the use of American power, about what we're doing in some of these places overseas, for sure.
Awesome.
Is there anything you did or do on your downtime to really ground you?
Great question. I loved hanging out with local Iraqis. I loved the food, the culture. I did a lot of reading. Especially my first deployment. I had a lot more downtime on my first deployment, not my second deployment. Did a lot of reading. We'd watch movies. Occasionally we'd have barbecues, make phone calls home, listen to music.
Interesting.
If you don't mind, what kind of books? Are there any books that still were like a great read that you just remember off the top of your head?
From that deployment? I mean, it was a long time ago, 16 years ago. I'll have to think about it.
No, of course. Well, you mentioned that you have 4 children.
Yeah.
How long have you been married, if you don't mind me asking?
So, my wife and I met about in the fall of 2012.
Gotcha.
And then we started dating a few months later, and then decided to build a family together. Met in September of 2012, decided to start a family in June. But we sort of did things a little bit backwards. We started making kids first, and then we got married later.
No worries. Yeah.
I joke that having marriage is really serious. You want to have kids first, kick the tires, make sure this is a career you want to jump into. And so we had some other issues. Her dad was sick at the time, so there's some issues that made it a little bit more difficult to plan a wedding at that time. But the second I met her, I knew she was the one for me, and I wanted to spend my life with her. And I started wearing a wedding ring even before we were married.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's awesome. The reason why I asked is because our film is really trying to capture the relationship between 2 individuals who are trying to maintain this kind of love.
Yeah, tell me about the film.
Yeah, John can speak about it. So he's a writer.
So the film is called Calypso, and the basic premise is about a soldier in Vietnam who falls in love with someone who is on the enemy side.
Okay.
And it's based off the legend of Calypso, and I know Jamar told you a little bit, legend of Calypso. So it's, the premise of Calypso is literally that warriors always end up on Calypso's island, and Calypso always falls in love with them, and she's always falls in love with them, and they always fall in love with her, but they always have to go back. They always have to do their duty, and there's that theme of just duty versus love in a way that goes on. So we want to explore that with this scenario of him, looking at his duty to his country and what he believes in, and also just the love he feels.
Why did you pick that story?
Of Calypso?
Yeah.
I just love. I don't know. It's just I don't know. It's more of a feeling that I get personally when I read it. I just.
Well, how did you discover it?
How did I discover it? I like mythology. I like the knowledge that it tries to teach us.
Yeah.
And I think those themes are very present. Of just sometimes when you're even just on vacation and I have to go and do work. I need to go back to what I need to do, my duty, my job. I need to protect people. Even if the war outside is uglier than the island you're on, you still feel like you need to go back out because that place needs you.
Have you read Odysseus in America? By Jonathan Shea. You should read it. So Jonathan Shea is a psychiatrist, psychologist who has done a ton of work with Vietnam veterans. And so he wrote a book called Odysseus in America, and he takes Odysseus' journey home from Ithaca to Ithaca from the Trojan War, and he sort of shows how Odysseus' journey is basically the journey of a veteran coming home from war.
Interesting.
Right?
I think I have heard of that, actually.
You know, the land of the lotus eaters, right? These are people who eat forbidden fruit. It's basically drugs, right? Drugs and alcohol that you can get lost in. There's the siren songs where you're getting lost in like this vision of the past.
Yep.
The cyclops, like you can have sort of like, you can end up with like a focused, myopic view of the world that's also dangerous. And so it's about how people can get lost on their way home, and that this can be a 20-year journey after a war to get home to Ithaca. But each of the islands that he encounters is sort of just another obstacle that veterans generally encounter on their way home from war. You should check it out.
Yes,
Interesting.
I will.
We definitely got to do that for our prep.
And they did like a play, or there was some sort of play for that, right?
Yeah.
I feel like.
Well, there's a great organization called Theater of War that does performances in Greek tragedy specifically around the veteran and military experience. Yeah,
and for me, my my grandfather and my great uncle also fought in Vietnam.
Really?
Yes. And
man, that makes me feel old. Your grandfather fought in Vietnam.
And it's also based off the legend of Achilles and Briseis as well, just because their dynamic is also very interesting. There was a point where Achilles, the greatest warrior in the Greek army, was considering not fighting anymore and just running away with her. And I'm just exploring those themes.
Yeah.
And so,
Of course,
I forgot, what's the question again?
We just got into the Greek mythology.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's asking like how you discovered the story and what was it that struck you and why that particular
dynamics,
story was so.
Especially now, because in COVID, for example, there's people who have to find spirituality indoors when they can't leave. Like they have to stay inside quarantine to figure out what they need to do for themselves, how to like stay, mentally capable and everything.
Sane.
Sane. And then there's people who felt like my mom, a nurse, an essential worker, she has to go out into that every day. And she watches the news and see people dying, and then she has to go every day to do her duty, to protect her family. Yeah. So that's why I like that. Both those stories just felt like very similar. They all like had a connection. And
where's your mom a nurse?
She's Montefiore Hospital.
Really?
Yeah.
What kind of nurse is she?
She is in. That is a good question.
Never got into that with her.
I did. She was working with kids, but I think she started doing something else recently. But she's in.
And she was in it during COVID.
Yes, she was in it. She was there, going out there every day. She was
doing her duty.
I saw her mindset when she was like, "I didn't sign up for this, but I feel like I had to do this." She's an LPN, and now she's studying to be an RN. So she's like gonna, get deeper into it. What's her name? She, Angela Morrison.
Okay.
Yes. Interesting. So.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because my mom herself, she takes care of old people. Yeah. So like even during COVID, like my mom was very religious, so like, she would pray for these people. And a lot of these people that she.
What's her religion?
She's Christian.
Yeah. Catholic, evangelical.
She grew up Catholic, but I think she just sticks to Christianity now.
Okay.
I don't really like to ask her too much because like she keeps it pretty personal. But there's a huge element of spirituality in our film as well. Yeah. So just hearing my mom's experience, like her praying for these people and like always like trying to speak to God and reach out to God to kind of explain, the circumstances that we're in. Yeah. And sometimes I feel like there's no answer, and sometimes like, you have to find that answer from within. Yeah. So I think when Jerron started writing the script, like I think that's what I connected to the most, So I wonder, I don't know if this is too personal, but are you a spiritual person? Are you like have like faith? And like how has that?
I think you have to.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think you have to.
Was that always there, or did you grow up with that, or is it something you
I became more religious in the Marine Corps.
Got you.
There's no atheists in foxholes. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
And
you have any more?
Yes. And I guess just to top it all off, at the end of the day, like when COVID happened, and then there was all this like social injustice going on, and everything, and you're inside. Me personally, I'm like trying to figure out, should I be doing something? What should I be doing? Yeah. And then at the end of the day, I just remember, like for me personally, like I am a creator. Like so I need to write. I need to do what I can from here. And that was just my personal journey and duty. Yeah. And that's why we're trying to do this film festival at the end of the year too, because there's other people similar to us, like Jamar. He did a peaceful protest documentary. He went out to every protest, just recorded what they were doing, just to tell their stories. Yeah. And I just think everyone needs to be able to tell their story in their own way.
Of course.
So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to accomplish. Yeah, and me growing up in the Bronx, there wasn't a lot of programs or things like that. And one of my favorite things along this journey is that we're creating that community. We're just meeting more people who want to do that. And
you're forging a path for others to follow, for others to follow as well.
That's always the goal.
Yeah.
You know, set an example for the next gen.
Yeah.
You know?
And how old are you guys?
I'm 20.
I'm 23.
You're 23?
Yeah.
Got it.
And Calypso is also based off a song we did on a movie we made last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you guys have worked together and done a bunch of projects together?
Yes.
We've been working together for like 2-3 years now.
2-3 years. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm part of a collective called Listen to the Kids, and our director.
Follow that on Instagram.
Yes, thank you. And we've just been creating platforms for artists to be the best version of themselves through events and through projects. So I've helped artists make albums. We worked on films. And
so what do you guys think about the state of the city?
State of the city?
Yeah.
State of the city. Okay.
It's interesting. Like, I always kind of felt that, like, at least before COVID, like I always felt like the city was fine.
Was fine.
Yeah. Like, at least I wasn't as into my community as I was like while COVID happened, you know. But then, especially around the whole George Floyd thing, you know, once we started to see the protests, the riots, like my community was destroyed. I live in the Bronx around Fordham Road, and like there's people that destroyed that entire Grand Concourse, you know. And I participated in trying to clean up, and I met a lot of people, and just hearing their stories and their experiences, like I realized like how much I was not understanding, even just like within my own proximity. So now at least like seeing like a couple months, like now that we're already almost a year into the pandemic, like I think the best thing that we can do is kind of like what you said, you know, like we all agree on the issues that are here, and we should do something, you know, we should come together, you know what I'm saying? I always felt like being selfish is always the wrong approach. You know, I always had at least growing up, I had an attitude that I need to leave the city. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to be a part of this community anymore, but.
Really?
Yeah.
And that shifted for you. Now you want to stay
completely. Like now I'm like, I need to be a part of this, you know what I'm saying? Because there's people that I've seen, they've lived here for my entire life, you know, and whether it's, I don't really know their household situation, but just seeing like their participation in the community is something that I admire now.
Yeah.
You know, it's something I want to do more of, you know, so it's been a complete 180 for me.
Yeah.
Honestly. Yeah.
I can only really speak from, right now I'm just speak from a local perspective, I guess.
Yeah.
I've always been of the mindset that, one, I just wanted more creative programs in my area. Because for me as a kid, like I was surrounded by a lot of craziness going on in my neighborhood. And the things that helped me were just little programs, like the library would have a little program where we could go there and play video games sometimes. And I would do that instead of being outside before I could go home. And there weren't a lot of programs where I could like learn music or like learn filmmaking. Like I had to teach most of those things to myself.
Yeah.
So
you had to teach yourself.
Yeah, I told myself how to make music. I'm a sample-based producer when I produce. I told myself how to write music. Filmmaking, we did learn at film school, but then we started building it for ourselves afterwards.
Of course.
City's in a weird place. Like I see my neighborhood getting safer, but also seeing it change and like.
Is there gentrification happening?
100%. 100%.
I live around Fordham Road. You know the whole road.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
100%. It's
insane.
It's so weird to see. Like it's just morphing. I feel the attitude changing of the people.
In what way?
People wanting to be more aware. Especially with this like past election that came, I just see people wanting to be more active and wanting to understand more.
Yeah.
So that's really cool to witness.
Are you guys planning on voting in June for the primary?
That was the goal. That was the goal.
That's the goal?
That's the goal.
It's not that hard.
I mean, yeah.
I want to become more.
I want to be more informed.
Yes.
I haven't dedicated my time to learning about the candidates and all that. So that's always a priority for me first. Yeah. You know.
But that could be a cool project. Like that's a great like video project too. That's right, like educating voters about. This is probably the most important election in the history of New York City.
Yes.
We get a new mayor, new comptroller. That's an important one. 37 out of 51 new city council members.
Oh my God.
Like the entire leadership change is going to change in the city. And we're either going to get the leadership we need to build a better city.
It's a better city,
or we're not. And like, there's only one sort of determinant of that, and that's
people.
How many people vote?
Right? Yeah, I definitely think it's important for people to vote. You know,
are there any resources you recommend personally as like someone like for, let's say, just young people saying we just want to know more about all the possible candidates that are going to be in the upcoming election?
Yeah, so like Gotham Gazette, the city, they have some sort of good sort of rundowns of people running for office. There's not a ton of great stuff out there. There's like there's some people who are doing like interviews with a bunch of different candidates, but like I think that's a huge gap.
Yeah,
I think it's a huge gap. I think there's a real need for voter education. Like even just like we have ranked choice voting. How does that work?
Yeah.
Like where do people need to go to vote? Right? Like how do you do absentee voting, vote by mail, early voting? Early voting is different than regular voting in terms of locations. Making sure that like the language barrier is huge. Right? Like I was knocking on doors in Inwood, and like probably 75% of the doors I was knocking on, you know, English is not really spoken. Right? And so like my Spanish is horrible. I'm doing what I can.
No, of course.
Right? And but there's huge barriers, like when you think about like voting, education, a system that's now complicated by ranked choice voting where you vote for multiple candidates, how you do that. There's a huge need there over the next 8 weeks, because the election is now 8 weeks out from today, to make sure voters are educated, not just on who to vote for, but how to vote.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, that's so difficult. You know,
I definitely wish I was more informed. I've been so many people. You know, when they just say like they go in and they see all the names and they don't know like they only know like 2 names.
Of course,
so everybody has that same problem.
Yeah, and then people vote for people just because they like the name.
Yes, literally.
I think the name sounds good. Yeah, it's
even for
problem.
like racial things. Like, I know my mother, like, you know, she's always looking for somebody who's Hispanic. You know. And if there's not that, then she won't vote at all. You know, and I don't think that's the right approach to have.
Yeah,
you know
it's a huge problem.
Yeah. So.
Yeah,
man. I do have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Just like, these are like more broader questions. Just like looking at going back to the whole mental health thing. What was your experience post Iraq and like trying to like, at least coming into like meeting your wife, you know, and like getting into like, you know, having a family, like. How was it, like, expressing your experiences with her about that?
So by the time I met my wife, I'd been home. I met her in the fall of 2012. My last combat deployment was 2004. Came home in 2005.
Okay.
So there'd been
about
some
7
space.
years. Gotcha.
But coming home from war was hard, right? It's like. You know, no matter who you are, there is trauma in war.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people also don't understand what PTSD is. PTSD is a survival mechanism. Right? So when you think about what it is, think about what the symptoms are of PTSD, right? Anxiety, hypervigilance, restlessness.
Yeah.
Those are things like, when you think about restlessness, what is that? It's or sleeplessness. Why can't you sleep at night? Well, if you've been in trauma, right, that is a survival mechanism that keeps you safe in a dangerous environment, right? Not being able to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Right? Hypervigilance, anxiety. What is anxiety? It's your heart racing.
Yeah.
Right? It's your body getting ready to act. Right? So you think about like before a sports game, you get nervous.
Yeah.
Right? All that nervousness is your body like, you know, getting blood out to the limbs.
Yeah.
Right? You know, your body warming up. You becoming focused, like that is you preparing to be able to fight or flight, right? It's all about the fight or flight response. All PTSD is the inability to turn off the fight or flight response.
Interesting.
And so when you have, you know, some people find that like, you know, that anxiety goes away after a beer or two.
Yeah.
They don't make the connection that that's called self-medicating.
Yeah.
Right? That's what they're doing.
Gotcha.
You know, and then what happens is like, you know, some folks are able to get the help they need.
Yeah.
Some folks like don't have a lot of trauma in their lives. Others have been traumatized. Like I've had Marines who told me that the hallways they grew up in were far scarier than the hallways they encountered in Fallujah. And so then what you deal with is, you know, trauma that compounds itself over time that is much more difficult to treat. And so PTSD is something that, as a survival mechanism, is healthy when you're in a dangerous environment.
I see.
Right, like if you're going to be good at war, good at combat, like having that hypervigilance, that anxiety, that focus, that quickness to react, those are all things that help you survive and thrive in dangerous environments. The problem is when you come home, being able to turn it off when you're no longer in that environment. It takes time, it takes therapy. For people that have had a lifetime of trauma, adverse childhood experiences, child abuse, sexual trauma, the road can be a lot longer.
Of course. Wow. Yeah. I've never had anybody explain it that way.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
I learned.
Yeah. So to kind of go into what you're doing now, when did it start? When did your whole organization begin? Like, when was the shift to like, now I need to start helping people who deal with these mental health issues?
So it started, I had I was one of my battalion commanders, a guy named Colonel Willie Buell, and he was stationed in the city for a 6-month sort of tour, He was stationed at the Council on Foreign Relations for about 6 months. And he and I went out for drinks, went out for beers, and we just had a really bad suicide in our battalion. Former sergeant went home, kissed his wife and kids at the dinner table, went upstairs, they heard the gunshot, and he killed himself.
Oh my God.
So Colonel Buell and I were talking about this. We'd had now at this point in time maybe 8 or 9, I can't remember the exact number of suicides in the battalion at that point. And Colonel Buell just said we need to do something about it. And that was in 2011. And so that's when we started putting the pieces together. We decided we were going to start a program that was going to provide world-class mental health care with the stipulation that it had to be effective. But we also wanted to remove all the barriers that veterans were facing to get the care that they needed. So it needed to be completely cost-free, bureaucracy-free, zero paperwork. Most importantly, it had to be effective. And then we started here in New York City, and then over time expanded to 30 cities around the U.S. And it's grown pretty significantly.
What other cities you don't mind me asking?
I mean, San Diego, Denver, Houston. Oh, wow. I mean, 30 of them.
All over the country.
Yeah, all over the country.
That's amazing. Huh?
Yeah, thank you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to jump in there.
I kind of had 2 thoughts. One was, have you ever heard about the legend of Ajax?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, because I did a project about him my senior year of college.
Okay.
And, we actually talked about how that was one of the first stories back then that actually addressed somewhat like mental health or like the state of a soldier who came home.
Yeah.
You know, happened to Ajax. And then my second question was, I guess I was gonna ask, how do you feel about the treatment of veterans? Because I know, like, we see, especially around New York, we see like a certain condition around.
Look, I think it's gotten. It was really bad when, like you said, your grandfather and your uncle were coming home from Vietnam. Right, it was atrocious. It's gotten better over time. There's still so much more that needs to happen, but veterans are treated infinitely better now than they were back then.
Yeah. So one last question, just to kind of wrap things up. How do you feel, like, how important is family to you, given like us being in COVID and everything that you kind of experienced in the last couple year? Like, how important is having that family bond? You know, and how?
It's the most important thing in the world. And I always had a rule in every business I've run, in the nonprofit, in my campaign: family first, always. You cannot get that time back.
Of course.
And like when you guys end up having kids and you start building your own families, and your parents probably feel this way. I remember like my 7-year-old. I remember when I held him in my arms for the first time. I remember he looked me right in the eyes.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at him and said, "I can't wait to hear what you have to say." And that was like a minute ago. Right? And now he's 7, and like bedtime last night, he's reading a story to me. Right? And I'm reading Harry Potter to him at night. And it goes by like that. And like there was somebody posted something on TikTok the other day about like there was a moment, tell this to your moms, they'll appreciate it. There was a moment where your mom or your dad picked you up in their arms, and unbeknownst to them, that was the last time they were going to be able to actually, that was going to be the last time they actually picked you up and held you. Or like I know, like we still hug our parents, right? You know, like, but there was some moment in time, and like I know with my 7-year-old, I'm getting very, very close to that moment, right? I mean, he's tall, he's getting bigger every day. and you don't get that time back. You know, and I think, you know, especially when you're young, sometimes like you don't really get a sense of like how time goes by so fast. It starts to speed up as you get older.
Of course.
But yeah, family is everything.
I cherish those moments.
Yeah, you gotta cherish those moments.
That's awesome, man.
I can relate to that a little bit. I used to be a bit of a bad kid when I was a child.
You were? I don't believe it.
I know,
Really?
I know. Yeah, a little bit. I used to get in fights, so it used to be crazy. And then the turn for me was actually when my little brother was born.
Yeah.
Because I remember.
What's your age difference?
Huh?
What's the age?
I'm 10 years older than him.
Okay.
10 years. So when I was 10 years old, on the day he was born, I remember going to the hospital and holding him for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is a little kid.
Yeah.
He's my blood, and he's like looking up at me, and I'm just like I got to be an example for him, and that changed a whole lot for me.
Yeah.
Going on
So he's 13 now?
Yep.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
I have a younger sister as well. The age gap is a little smaller. She's 5 years younger than me.
Okay.
But I still always try to, like, she's very lazy.
What? Really?
Very lazy. And I'm very big on having purpose. Leading your life with a goal always in mind. And I think trying to set that example for her is something that I always prioritize.
Yeah.
You know, trying to.
Just the two of you?
Yeah, just me and her.
Cool.
You know, it's a family of four.
Yeah.
My dad's always working, so he's not around as much. So, like, sometimes I had to be that, that example for her. You know, so I completely agree with you, man.
Yeah. Well, I love it.
Thank you so much.
It's
for
been
today,
such
man.
a pleasure
Great.
meeting you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
My name is Zach Iscol. I'm running for comptroller, and I would be honored to have your vote.
Vote on June 1st.
June 22nd.
22nd.
Vote on June 22nd, early voting June 12th.
Get a picture of you guys?
Yep.